after the above update to our CSS, the modal is no longer showing on our page, since we only have the show class in the CSS, but not in the markup, not in the HTML. So now all that we need to do is toggle the show class on and off on button click. To track when a button is clicked, we'll need to use events. So now I'm going to be attaching an event listener to this button. To attach an event listener to a button, we actually need to do two things. First, target the HTML element in the DOM, in our case the button, so that we can subsequently attach an event listener to it. And second, write the event listener code. Just like we learned in the previous video, the easiest way to do this is by adding an ID to our target HTML element. Thus, let's start by adding an ID to our button's markup. So we'll change this code right here, or we'll update it a little bit, and we'll set it to be, instead of having the trigger modal as a class, I'll set it to an ID. Control S to save my changes. And to explain how this works, well, basically with a CSS class, we would need to use something like query selector or query selector all, which gives us a collection of HTML objects. But with an ID, we can use get element by ID. So back inside the script here, I'll do const btn equals document get element by ID, and then I'll use the trigger modal right here. And now I'll just add an event listener to it. So btn add event listener, and the first value is going to be the event that I'm listening for. That's the click event. Then I'm going to add an arrow function right here, and inside of it, for now, I'm just going to console log that the button is clicked. So clicked the button. All right, so I'm going to press Control S to save everything. And now that I've attached the event listener, clicking on this button will log out the click the button text to the console. So let me press Control S again. And now here I'm going to click the inspect, or actually I made a mistake here. So I'm going to click the inspect command to show the console, and that should do it. Let's zoom in into the modal a little bit. So now when I click it, it shows clicked the button in the console. So now I'll be adding the show class to my modal's markup. Similar to how we easily targeted the button using an ID, we'll need to target the modal with another ID, so that we can easily pinpoint the element in our HTML where we want to add or remove the show class. Thus, we'll first add an ID to our modal's outermost div, the one with the HTML class attribute set to modal overlay. So basically, I'll be updating this line right here, and I'll add it an ID of modal overlay. Now we can easily store the above div in a variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set another const modal equals document.get element by ID, and I'm targeting the ID with the value of modal overlay. And now I can update the code in the event listener from the console log to this. So let me first delete console log, and now I'll type modal. So that's what I'm targeting. And I'm going to make some change to this modal element. So class list dot toggle. And I'll be toggling the show class on this modal. That's it. Now we begin with only a button on our HTML page, and once we click the button, the modal will show. Let's try it out. Alright, so that works. Let me zoom it out a little bit so that it's easier to confirm. And let's press the refresh button. When I click the trigger modal, the modal shows. However, we still need to have a way to close it, and we'll do that next. Now's the time to remove the show class from our modal's markup. All we've got left to do is to remove the show class, and that way that will close the modal. For that, we might need to listen for click events on a number of HTML elements. For example, the X button in the top right corner of the modal, the cancel button in the modal's footer, or the gray overlay area surrounding the modal. To listen for events on multiple HTML elements, we can't use the ID attribute. Instead, we'll add the close CSS class to both the X button and the cancel button. That way we'll be able to attach an event listener to multiple places in our HTML, that is, to any element that has the close class on it. First, let's add the close class to the X and the cancel buttons. To do that, we'll just update our markup. So here's our HTML. Here we already have the class of close on the button. And on the cancel button, I'll just add the same class. Now we'll need to find all the elements with the close class using the getElementsByClassName. So in my JS code, I'll be adding another const, and this will be const close class, and I'll set it to document.getElementsByClassName, and I'm looking for the close class. Since the close class is a collection, we'll need to run a for loop on it. So for that, let's do for let I equals 0, I is less than close class dot length, I plus plus. Now I'll access each of the elements in the close class HTML collection, and I'll add an event listener to each one. So here I'm listening for a click event, and I'll pass it a function that will be ran when this click event is fired. And on this function, I'll just do modal.classList.remove show. And here I'm just removing the show class from any of the close class elements. Control S to save my changes. And with this update, I've made my modal fully usable. So let me now test it out. I'll click the modal, and now I'll click the cancel button, which turns it off. I'll trigger the modal again, and I'll click the X right here, and that shuts it down too. So there you have it. That's a very simple modal built in Vanilla.js with some help from CSS and HTML, of course. In conclusion, there are many more things that we can do to improve this modal. We could make the modal close when clicking the semi-transparent overlay, which doesn't work right now. We could also make it more accessible by, for example, closing the modal when the escape key is pressed. There are also mobile resolution considerations. All in all, there is always more that we can do to improve our apps. The important thing is we built a fully working modal from scratch using only HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript. And any additional improvements are left for you to implement.